It's Labor Day, and some window licker decided that I didn't actually need the keys to my first two stops on a midnight route, so I spent 12 hours on the clock, doubling back during lunch hours with a semi. Excuse me. Anyway, I read a book, and it was good, even though it didn't really have a point, which you can say about a lot of things that Ernest Hemingway wrote. When I was a little kid, my older brother told me that Ernest Hemingway and I shared a birthday. And so I just decided, like, oh, okay, cool. He must be my favorite writer. And then I was probably close to, well, let's see, I was in my late 20s. I was probably 28 the first time I actually read a book by Ernest Hemingway. And I enjoyed it, even if I got to the end and I thought, there's not really a plot here. What was the point of this? My book was The Old Man and the Sea. And I'll always remember what my brother told me after I read it. It says the thing with literature like that is it's not necessarily about the plot or the character. It's about the challenge and the virtues that the character showed in meeting the challenge, even if he didn't necessarily overcome the challenge. He goes, the story affirms courage. And I thought, okay, that gives it value. There's a quote that gets tossed around a lot. I don't know if I can't remember if it's C.S. Lewis or G.K. Chesterton. I want to say it was Chesterton. He talks about the value of fairy tales to children. It's not that the fairy tales are supposed to tell them that monsters exist, because children kind of intuitively know that. The point of fairy tales is to tell children that monsters can be defeated. And effective fairy tales, righteous fairy tales, are ones that show characters like embodying righteous virtues in the act of overcoming those monsters. In a sense, then, that's what Hemingway was writing when he wrote The Old Man and the Sea. Although it wasn't necessarily about the fisherman Santiago overcoming the marlin that he caught, it was about the fact that he just didn't give up. That he was courageous and he didn't panic. He didn't give up on his treasure even when the fish dragged him out into deeper sea and sharks started eating at it. All of that, like he grabbed that rope and he never gave up. There's value in that. The book that I read today was A Movable Feast, and it is then the fifth book of Hemingway's that I have read, because I have also read For Whom the Bell Tolls and The Sun Also Rises, and I've also read a book that was a compilation of quotes from Hemingway on the subject of writing, from his various writings and communiques over the years, which is kind of funny because it's not the kind of book that Hemingway himself would have put together. Nevertheless, that was a book that was valuable to me because it showed me some insights from him into the process of his writing and the why of it all. Some of that was touched on here. A Movable Feast was, well, it wasn't the title that he originally chose for that book. There's a foreword that explains why the book ended up with that title. It was almost like reading his journal. It was his personal writings at the end of his life, the last couple of years while he was abroad and after he had undergone electroshock therapy to treat his depression. He also was a drinker. I don't know what the threshold is to distinguish between a drinker and an alcoholic, but the man was, he had alcohol every day, it sounded like, the way that he wrote his descriptions here. He talked about his third marriage and his fourth marriage. This was not even a story. This was a collection of writings that weren't really going towards something, but as he was writing and observing his surroundings and reflecting on his life, tidbits of wisdom came out. Sometimes they even overlapped to create a theme, but tidbits of wisdom came out that I found valuable and good and even wholesome. especially from a man who lived in a way that was very different from how I lived. And he ran in different circles, and he knew extremely popular and successful writers, Gertrude Stein, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Zelda Fitzgerald, and he learned things from those writers and observed things from them. And I found practical and applicable value in those observations. He was also a very masculine man. He was not afraid of doing difficult things, and there are, I would say, maybe extremes that he took that to, and ways that perhaps he ought to have reined himself in, but if he did, then maybe he wouldn't have written the way that he did, and maybe his writings wouldn't have impacted people the way that they have over time. I don't know. So I've read a couple of his novels, and I've noticed recurring themes in the subject matter as well as his methodology of writing, his voice, his tone. I generally like how he writes, even if a lot of the time I don't get what he's writing about or why he's saying what he's saying. The pieces of wisdom that bubble up through the, detritus seems like a denigrating word, but through the noise and through the echo of it all, the snow and the sound, those pieces there are valuable to me. I could see this being the kind of book that I would pick up, I would read, I would highlight certain lines, underline some things, and then I would put it on my writing desk. And if I needed to sit down and get 30 minutes of writing done in a day, I would just thumb through and reread some of the highlighted lines from Hemingway and remember why it is that I love this and how I might approach it when I'm tired and still need to get something written. He and I were writing in very different ways. Me writing a novel is going to be very different from Hemingway writing a novel. But as I was listening to him talking about the process of writing and how he relegated himself to the poverty that kind of defined his writing life, he still was committed to living that way. Excuse me. Like, it didn't bother him being poor. He had some mobility as a result of that, but more to the point is he was answering a higher internal calling, living the way that he did. There were parts of his reflections on his life as a writer that reminded me of Washington Irving's own reflections, and the fact that he became a writer because he knew that he would absolutely hate himself if he tried to be anything other than that. But writing also was pretty much locking himself into a life of poverty. And he actively dissuaded a nephew of his from taking up the craft just because he's like, this is a life of temporal and financial hardship that I don't think that you should want to live by. I personally would love to make a living off my writing, but I've certainly got to monetize it a lot more effectively. That's why I'm doing the truck. But maybe some of that is just a matter of me actually sitting down and making sure that I'm writing something every night for 30 minutes when I'm not actively working on a project. Deadlines seem to be helpful. Things like that. If I could write more like Hemingway, even though I don't necessarily write about the same things, I think that would be pretty good and cool. Because I like the way he writes, even if it doesn't always make sense to me. Anyway, recommendation there for A Movable Feast. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the forewords and the afterwords that accompanied the manuscript and showed some different endings that he might have had in mind and different introductions, just as an insight into his process and all of that. I think it was good. I'll probably give it 4 stars. I'm unlikely to make it a best of year designation or anything, but it certainly had its moments and its strengths. So check it out. Let me know what you think. Till next time, drive safe. See you out there.